In his final concert, Elvis Presley didn't just sing, he confessed. As the orchestra swelled behind Unchained melody, he whispered something no one caught on tape, except one person sitting quietly in the front row. When Priscilla's eyes filled with tears, the audience cheered, never realizing they had just witnessed his last goodbye. June 26, 1977, Market Square Arena, Indianapolis. The air buzzed with 18,000 fans pressed shoulder to shoulder, the smell of hairspray and camera flash powder thick as static. Backstage, under the blue glare of the dressing room lights, Elvis Presley adjusted the rhinestone collar of his white jumpsuit. The sequins still caught fire under every bulb, but his hands shook when he tied the wide belt. Joe Esposito handed him a towel. "You good, E?" Elvis smiled without answering. His voice had grown rougher these last months, but his eyes still had that impossible spark, the one that could silence a crowd before he ever sang a note. "Just one more good night," he whispered. When the announcer called his name, the roar that followed nearly lifted the stage. For a heartbeat he closed his eyes, feeling the floor vibrate like thunder. Then he stepped into the light. The heat hit him first, bright, punishing, but familiar. He gripped the microphone stand like an anchor. "Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen." The band kicked into CC Rider. Brass blared, drums pounded, and every flashbulb turned the moment into lightning. From the nosebleed seats to the front row, people swayed, crying and laughing at once. Somewhere in the fifth row, a single camera light blinked red. Halfway through the second song, he caught his reflection in the teleprompter glass. The crowd was still clapping when Elvis turned away from the bandstand and leaned toward pianist Glenn Hardin. Sweat trickled down his temple, his breathing heavy but measured. "Glenn," he said softly, almost lost under the cheers. "We're changing the next one." Hardin blinked. "Changing? To what, E?" Elvis looked toward the audience, scanning the faces until his gaze froze near the center rows. The one that was hers. It wasn't in the set list. Not tonight. Not since she had stopped coming around years ago. But suddenly that didn't matter. The house lights dimmed to a single spotlight. The stage crew looked confused. Colonel Parker frowned in the wings, waving his cigar like a warning. But Elvis nodded at the band. "Key of C. Let's go." A hush rippled through the arena as the first piano notes of Unchained melody rang out. Slow, aching, defiant. Every fan recognized it instantly. This wasn't a song about fame or glory. It was a plea, a confession sung through trembling breath. The camera zoomed in on his face. His eyes glistened under the sweat and stage haze. When he sang, "Oh, my love, my darling," the microphone crackled, but the tremor in his voice carried something deeper. Exhaustion, forgiveness, maybe both. Midway through the verse, he closed his eyes and whispered something too low for the PA system. Sound techs later swore they heard only a hum, a syllable, maybe a name. But in that moment, the arena went dead silent. 18,000 people frozen. Even the flashing cameras paused. Elvis reached for the high note, voice breaking, but the audience leaned closer instead of pulling back. That imperfection made it real. The sound wasn't powerful anymore, it was human. Then, he did something no one expected. He let go of the microphone stand and played the final notes himself, his fingers heavy on the piano. The orchestra followed his tempo, slower, like time itself was dragging its feet not to end. When he sang the final line, "God speed your love to me," he didn't look at the crowd. He looked at one seat in the fifth row. Nobody else noticed, but Priscilla Presley was there. Seated quietly, head bowed, her face lit only by the stage reflection. Was the song meant for her? Or was it a message to everyone he had ever loved and lost? When the last note faded, the crowd erupted. Thunderous applause, cheers, whistles. But Elvis didn't smile. He nodded once, eyes glassy, and whispered to himself, "That's all right now." As the ovation rolled on, he set the mic back into its stand and turned toward the wings. The band waited for his next cue, but none came. Something had shifted. Even the crew backstage felt it. That strange stillness before history folds itself into myth. But as the lights dimmed, a camera panned across the crowd and captured a single tear no one would understand for decades. The final chord lingered like smoke. The spotlight faded, but the camera kept rolling, sweeping across faces lit by tears and disbelief. Some fans held up signs. Others simply stood frozen, hands over their hearts, as if clapping would break the spell. And then the lens found her. In the fifth row, just beyond the security rail, Priscilla Presley sat still, hands clasped tightly in her lap, shoulders barely moving. She wore soft beige, a color that made her blend into the crowd, but her presence was unmistakable. When Elvis sang, "God speed your love to me," her lips trembled. For a moment she looked down, almost ashamed to be seen. But the next instant, she looked back up, eyes glistening in the light that once belonged only to him. The audience around her cheered, oblivious. They thought she was just another fan overcome by nostalgia. No one realized what they were witnessing: the last exchange between two souls who once defined American love itself. Years earlier, they had walked down the aisle in Las Vegas, while flashbulbs turned their wedding into a national event. Now, those same flashes painted their goodbye. When the curtain fell, Priscilla didn't stand. She just watched the stage as the band cleared their instruments and the lights dimmed to black. One security guard, Bill Superfoot Wallace, later said he saw her whisper something as she rose. He couldn't hear the words, but he remembered the motion, lips forming what looked like, "Thank you." That brief clip, captured by a local cameraman, sat forgotten in a news vault for decades. Then, in 2024, it resurfaced on social media. The frame was grainy, the color washed, but the emotion was raw. A generation too young to have seen Elvis live suddenly felt what his fans had felt that night. Comments flooded the video. "She didn't need to say a word. That's what love looks like when it has nowhere left to go." But back in 1977, no one knew the meaning behind that silence. Not the crew, not the fans, not even the Colonel pacing angrily backstage, muttering about unscheduled set changes. For Elvis, though, it was closure. For Priscilla, it was understanding. She once said in an interview years later, when he sang that song, it wasn't about the past. It was about peace. Still, something lingered that night, something the cameras didn't catch. As she exited through the side tunnel, a stagehand, Larry Geller, caught her eye. He recalled later, "She looked like she'd been crying, but she smiled. She told me, 'He still has that magic.'" Then she walked away. No press, no entourage, just the echo of the crowd fading behind her. That was the last time Priscilla ever saw Elvis perform. Less than 2 months later, he would be gone. It's strange, isn't it? How sometimes the quietest reactions speak louder than any ovation. How a single tear, unnoticed for decades, can rewrite the way the world remembers a legend. When the news footage resurfaced, fans debated endlessly. Was that tear for love or regret? No one could agree. But those who were there swear the moment felt final, as if everyone somehow knew this was goodbye, though no one dared to say it out loud. Backstage, Elvis asked for her. But by then, Priscilla was already gone, and what he whispered next would never make it to broadcast. The roar of the audience still trembled through the walls, but backstage it was a different world. Dim lights, stale smoke, and the slow hiss of an oxygen tank. Elvis stepped through the curtain, shoulders sagging, the white rhinestones on his jumpsuit catching what little light remained. Joe Esposito met him with a towel. "You okay, boss?" Elvis nodded, breath ragged. Yeah, just needed to feel it one more time." He sat on the edge of the leather couch, staring at the floor. The applause beyond the door kept rolling like distant thunder, fading, rising, fading again. For once, he didn't reach for water or medication. He just listened. Joe broke the quiet. "They loved it, that song. Never seen a crowd like that." Elvis didn't answer. He rubbed his hands together, eyes fixed on the dressing room mirror. "Did she hear me?" he finally asked. Joe hesitated. "Yeah, boss, she did." Elvis exhaled, a half laugh, half sigh. "Good." Across the room, a reel-to-reel recorder sat idle on the counter, still threaded with fresh tape. He'd started bringing it everywhere, recording fragments, thoughts, anything he couldn't say aloud. Tonight, he pressed the record button and spoke softly into the small silver mic. "You can't live on stage forever," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes the song's over before the band knows it." When he stopped the tape, he looked at Joe again. "Don't tell anyone about that. Not yet." Outside, Red West knocked once and peeked in. "Colonel wants a word." Elvis waved him off. "Tell him I'm done for tonight." Red lingered. "You sure?" I said I'm done." The tone in his voice made Red close the door gently behind him. For the first time all night, the king of rock and roll was alone. He took a sip of Gatorade, leaned back, and stared at his reflection. The man in the mirror looked older than he remembered, but there was peace in his eyes. Minutes passed. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, "Goodbye, Scylla." No microphone caught it clearly, but the reel-to-reel was still rolling. Years later, a sound engineer cleaning the archives found that clip. Faint, distorted, but unmistakable. When he played it back, the room went silent. Elvis hadn't said it to the crowd or to the camera. He'd said it to her. That tape would never air. It circulated quietly among collectors, a myth whispered in fan circles, until one of them leaked a few seconds online decades later. The internet called it the lost goodbye. Is it possible that a man can say more in a whisper than in a lifetime of songs? Maybe that's why legends never really disappear, they just leave echoes. A week later, in the quiet of Graceland's jungle room, Elvis sat at his piano, ready to record one final message no one would hear until long after he was gone. Graceland, Memphis, July 1977. The summer heat pressed against the windows like a living thing. Upstairs, the hall was quiet except for the soft creak of floorboards and the faint buzz of an old tape deck. Elvis sat at his piano in the jungle room, barefoot, robe loose, hair uncombed. The marble lion statues on either side of him reflected the amber lamp glow. Beside the piano, a half-empty glass of water, a stack of blank cassettes, and a notepad scrawled with half-finished lyrics. He pressed record. A red light blinked, and for the first time that night he began to hum. It wasn't a full song, just fragments. The echo of Unchained melody, slowed to a prayer. "Tell her I did my best," he murmured. His voice cracked. He paused, collecting breath, then played again. Soft chords that wavered like candlelight. There was no orchestra, no crowd, no pressure to perform. Only a man talking to the ghosts that fame had left behind. Downstairs, Charlie Hodge, his longtime friend, waited by the intercom. He could hear every note through the static. "He's recording again," Charlie whispered to Joe Esposito, who stood at the bottom of the stairs. Joe sighed. "Let him. This one sounds different." Upstairs, Elvis finished the verse and leaned into the mic. "For Scylla. For Lisa." The words were almost lost in the hiss. He smiled faintly, as if picturing them both. "Guess the king's out of songs," he said softly, then struck the final chord. When the tape clicked off, he didn't move right away. Outside, thunder rumbled across the Memphis sky. He closed his eyes, whispering a line only the tape would remember. "If love was all I had left, I'd still sing." Later, Charlie carried the reel downstairs and labeled it simply, July 77, piano. He stored it in a drawer, forgetting it existed until years after Elvis's passing. Decades later, Priscilla would discover that same reel while sorting old belongings at Graceland. She placed it in a vintage player, and as the first notes filled the room, her hand covered her mouth. No one else was there to see it, but she smiled through tears. That unreleased tape would surface quietly online in 2018, uploaded by a fan archive under the title The Final Recording. Within hours, millions listened. Comments flooded in. He wasn't singing to the world. He was singing home. It became proof that even in his final days, Elvis wasn't chasing applause. He was reaching for peace. Isn't it strange how the truest performances happen when no one's watching? How sometimes a whisper outlives an entire stadium's roar? The red light on the recorder faded to black that night. But in that silence, his legacy began to hum again. Decades later, that lost recording would ignite. Something unexpected. Not on stage, but online, where millions would feel the goodbye the world missed. 47 years later, a grainy clip flickered to life on millions of phone screens. It began with static, then the soft crackle of a tape, Elvis's voice echoing across time. Within hours, the video titled Elvis Presley, The Lost Goodbye, 1977, spread faster than any press release ever could. Comments flooded in before the first day ended. I wasn't even born when he died. But this made me cry. He wasn't performing. He was saying goodbye. For the younger generation, Elvis had always been a myth, a face on posters, a voice on jukebox nostalgia playlists. But here, stripped of the glitter and stage lights, he sounded human, fragile, real. TikTok users began overlaying the track with old wedding photos of Elvis and Priscilla, black and white clips of their daughter running through Graceland's halls, candlelight tributes filmed by fans from Japan to Tennessee. In 7 days, the clip crossed 120 million views. What struck people most wasn't the music. It was her silence. Near the video's end, an editor spliced in the rediscovered 1977 concert shot. Priscilla in the fifth row, motionless, tear glinting under the lights. That 5-second frame became the internet's obsession. News headlines called it the tear that broke the internet. Rolling Stone ran a feature, A Goodbye Caught on Tape. Fans wrote essays, songs, even short films about what that single look meant. And yet, through all the noise, Priscilla said nothing. No statement, no interview. Just one quiet Instagram post. A white rose on a piano, captioned with 3 dots. For the world, it was content. For her, it was closure. Some say the reason the clip resonated wasn't nostalgia, but recognition, because every viewer had someone they'd lost and never properly said goodbye to. Is that why millions kept replaying it? To borrow a piece of his farewell for their own? As the trend reached mainstream news, historians and audio engineers verified the recording. The real serial number matched the archive code from Graceland's 1977 inventory. It was authentic. Elvis really had whispered those words. Suddenly, the legend felt alive again. Radio stations re-aired his last performances. Old fans returned to candlelight vigils. New ones discovered his interviews, his laughter, the way he always thanked the crowd before leaving the stage. In Memphis, tourists placed fresh flowers by the gates of Graceland. Among them, someone left a small card that read, "We finally heard what she did." That's the strange power of memory. It waits for the right generation to listen. Technology resurrected what time tried to erase, and in doing so, it reminded millions that love stories never truly end. They just keep finding new audiences. But one final gesture from Priscilla would give that digital storm a human heartbeat. A single rose that turned history into grace. Graceland, August 16th. The morning sun painted the gates gold as thousands of fans lined Elvis Presley Boulevard. Candles flickered beside framed photos, handwritten notes, and flowers in every shade of memory. But among them, one detail caught every camera that passed. A single white rose, wrapped in silk ribbon, resting against the memorial stone. There was no card. No signature. Only a small tag with one initial, C. Reporters speculated instantly. Some said it was coincidence. Others knew better. Priscilla Presley had flown into Memphis the night before, quietly, avoiding attention. A hotel staff member later recalled seeing her carry a plain white box under her arm as she left before dawn. She gave no interviews, just a soft, "I just needed to stop by." For fans who'd followed their story across decades, the meaning was clear. That rose wasn't a publicity move. It was the period at the end of a sentence that had taken a lifetime to write. As visitors filed past the grave, many stopped to take photos. One elderly man whispered. He sang to her one last time. Now she answered. That image spread online by noon, hashtag the white rose trending across every platform. But what made it powerful wasn't just nostalgia. It was restraint. No speech, no statement. just an act of stillness in a world addicted to noise. Silence had always been their most honest language. He'd ended with a whisper. She replied with one too. It made people pause, really pause, in a way modern stories rarely do. They scrolled back, replayed the clip of his final performance, watched her reaction again, and realized that the ending they'd missed in 1977 had always been there, just waiting for them to listen. A fan page captioned it perfectly, "Some goodbyes don't echo, they bloom." In the years that followed, that single rose became a symbol. Fans began leaving white roses at his memorial every August 16th, a quiet ritual now known as the Rose Vigil. Even the Graceland staff added a small plaque by the piano in the Jungle Room reading, "Recorded July 1977, the final song." Visitors often stand in silence there, imagining his fingers on the keys, hearing faint echoes that aren't really there, just memory filling the air where music once lived. It's almost poetic. The man who built his life on applause found his peace in quiet, and the woman who once lived in his shadow found her voice without saying a word. So what remains after the curtain falls? Is it the records, the fame, the stage lights? Or is it the small human moments? The rose, the whisper, the shared silence that outlives every song? When people talk about Elvis today, they don't just talk about the king. They talk about the man who looked up from a piano bench one final time and sent his love into eternity. And about the woman who, decades later, answered that love not with words, but with grace. Because legends may fade, but love, when sung honestly, never does. If the story touched you, share it with someone who still believes in lasting love. Because sometimes the most powerful goodbyes aren't shouted from stages. They're whispered across time. And maybe, just maybe, that's what keeps a legend alive.